Coming up, the New York Football Giants continue to add to their roster on day two, bringing in safety Tyler Nubin and also cornerback Andru Phillips. Will break in on the fits, what it means for the roster currently, and how do we look at day three and where Big Blue continue to improve. We dive in coming up next. Yes, my friends, it's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where you know that I am one of your hosts, Adam Armbrecht, and soon, TBD, Andrew Makowitz will be joining us as well. We're healthy, we're wealthy, we're wise. We're looking at the New York Football Giants and the 2024 draft, where obviously on day one, pick 6, no movement, couldn't trade up, didn't want to trade back. They take Malik Neighbors, they get a stud weapon to add into the wide receiver room. On day two, it really was, as we're going to talk about here, all the ways in which the top of the second round kind of fell apart if you had certain visions of players that you liked for the Giants, but also broke their way when it comes to safety Tyler Nubin. So we'll talk about Nubin. We'll talk about Phillips. He was a guy that was on our list, certainly, and what it means for the Giants going forward here. Joe Schoen and Brian Dable, they met with the media as well late last night. They talked about both these players and then also kind of the draft process and how things can unfold, whether it's day one, day two, and now going to day three. And you have to be flexible, have to have the ability to look at your board and say, okay, this is what we were hoping for. This is where we're at now. What do we think we're getting? So first and foremost here, let's start off with Tyler Nubin as we get, a little bit of that early Saturday morning. Thanks for joining us live over on YouTube as well. I've appreciated everybody that's been in through this, going over these last couple of days, and had some great interactions with everybody as well. So day two kicks off here, and if you were watching the first round and you're thinking about former Joe Schoen, Brian Dable ties with the Buffalo Bills, we talked about Keon Coleman a lot. He goes first there in the second round, 33rd to the Buffalo Bills, who had traded with the Kansas City Chiefs. So end up finding their wide receiver. But ultimately, as we work our way all the way down to 15, it's going to be Tyler Nubin. Now, first and foremost on him, we talk about a player who overall was 52nd, so technically he does fall into the wheelhouse here for the Giants. Remember, we were talking about safety Jaden Hicks, 59th overall, number 2 at the position ranking as safety. But to be clear, you heard Nick Saban talk about this on the broadcast. He believes that Tyler Nubin was the best safety in this draft. And from our perspective, well, I really like Jaden Hicks. I was talking about how if he's there at 70, you can start to think about that. Maybe you get the cornerback in the second round. You end up getting a player who is 6'2", 200 pounds, very instinctual guy, going to be someone who can be physical, can play down towards the box there, obviously, has the ability to play deep, too high safety looks. You think about what the Giants have in there currently with Pinnock, going to pair him with that. You think about Dane Belton in behind him. All of a sudden, the key word, especially, it applies to both sides of the ball here. You think about Shane Bowen, you think about the defense, versatility, versatility, versatility. And one of the other areas that we know the Giants struggled in when we think back to last season and in just years past in general, covering tight ends for the opposition. So a 6'2", 200-pounder, he's going to be able to go ahead and match up inside of those tight end groups as well. And you like the way that he kind of tracks the quarterback, understands the game. He's going to get guys. This is to go to Joe Shane's commentary when he spoke last night. Going to have a player that's going to get everybody into the right positions on the field, put them in a good spot to be successful when it comes to down over down, making sure we're lined up, making sure, you think about up the middle here, as we'll get Andy in a second. Think about up the middle of this defense now, right? Defensive front and pressure, yes, but why did you bring in Bobby Okereke? Wanted to have a leadership voice to helping to set that table in the front seven. Why do you bring in a guy like Tyler Nubin with the 47th overall pick? Because he's going to be the anchor of that defense. He's going to get these players in the right position throughout the secondary, which is going to be a very young secondary, as we'll talk about Andru Phillips here coming up as well. This is going to be a young team, but the belief is that Tyler Nubin comes in, brings you leadership, brings you a culture changer, as they talked about in the press conference. Why? Because Minnesota, he's regarded as being a culture changer for the Minnesota Gophers in his time there as well. So excellent player. Love the pick. Surprised that he was there in a lot of ways for the Giants. But that being the case, we get one Andrew Makowitz up on the big board into the big screen. And we let you know today's episode, of course, is brought to you by Pietential.com. Pietential. Why? That spells Potential. It is an online assessment tool, basically a free survey for individual users, sets a baseline for your well-being, gives you tools to improve over time, and also tracks your progress. It's a great opportunity, whether you are someone who did not get drafted as high as you hoped, or maybe someone who became the apple of a team's eye, and now all of a sudden the pressure is on you. Go ahead and get over to Potential.com and continue to find ways to improve yourself. Andy, we welcome you in. We're talking about Tyler Nubin. We're talking about that second round selection and a little bit of the surprise that a player like that was there, even though, as I mentioned at the top, 52nd overall. But in a lot of mocks, this is top of the second round kind of territory. And I was just going to start to get into how the board fell for the Giants here, even if it fell poorly and then ended up falling well, because a big run on cornerbacks happens just ahead of the Giants.
Yeah, of course, Adam. When we came in live yesterday morning, we talked a little bit about how the board looked great. And there were, of the next 24 or 25 or so players that were listed on the board, 6 of them were cornerbacks. And cornerback was obviously an area of need for the Giants. You had Kool-Aid McKinstry. You had a whole host of players up there that we said, man, Cooper DeJean, imagine if he falls to the Giants. Instead,
Kamari Lassiter, Max Melton, everyone underneath the sun here was just sitting there for the Giants to say, oh, when we get to 50, we get to 47, excuse me, it'll just be our choice of all the incredible talents we want to go with.
I'm sure every team feels like this, but I was like, man, do they know that the Giants desperately need one and that like whichever one they want is never going to fall? Like that's how it felt as a fan watching the draft unfold. Obviously the Giants need running back help. You saw someone trade up in front of the Giants in order to get Jonathan Brooks.
Yeah, Carolina Panthers get up there for him. And Joe Shane, by the way, to wrap in, because it's good to wrap in how things were unfolding there. In last night in the press conference, they asked him specifically about that. Hey, were you thinking maybe running back? I can't remember who it is with Carolina. He said, we're best friends. We go back a long ways. He had called us. We had talked to them, but it didn't seem like the impression there was Giants were not keyed in on the potential of taking a Jonathan Brooks. So it wasn't necessarily about getting ahead of the Giants. It was for Carolina just trying to find that spot, and they ended up going up a couple places there and getting their guy.
Yeah, GM Dan Morgan, he's been connected. I believe he was in Buffalo as the player personnel guy with Joe Shane, so they obviously have a good relationship. I'm sure that they had some communication back and forth, and we're pretty transparent with each other. At least, like this is not the direction we're going.
You're not going to take my running back, are you?
Please don't take him or trade or do something. Help me out here. But to your point, we kind of locked in on the idea that the Giants were going to go ahead and get a cornerback. And then when the slide happens, you kind of look at it and say, well, we need to address other areas of need. We shouldn't be reaching, especially in this round at 47, for a guy that maybe can be gotten there later. Funnily enough, the guy that they ended up getting later was someone that people were saying, well, why don't you just go up and get the guy that you want? Coincidentally, the Giants were able to get 2 impact players. Tyler Nubin is an interesting one to me. The way that he's been described from multiple people is he is just purely instinctual, right? He just gets the idea of being a safety. He has this innate ability to take 2 or 3 steps away, watch the eyes of the quarterback, and then pounce, then strike, bait guys into making the incorrect play, thinking that he's out of position. He is a ball hawk. That's another thing that's mentioned about him. He is a leader.
13 interceptions.
I mean, yeah, he literally finds a way to get to the ball. He is awesome at that. That is his number one trait. It's instinctual. He's a ball hawk. He just knows where to be. And you heard, if anyone saw the clip, I really do love the clips where you see Joe Shane and Brian Daboll calling the players to let them know that they're bringing the pick. Man, what an emotional roller coaster that must be, right, Adam?
Oh, by the way, because Joe Shane, it's like we're in the middle of a draft and we're really excited to have you, but we also have the next picks coming up. We're taking phone calls. We're doing all these things, but you want to get in touch with these guys. Tyler Nubin, and this happened, we'll talk about with Andrew Phillips as well. But Tyler Nubin, you can hear him, he's trying to. I mean, he says, you're gonna get all of me. You're gonna get everything. You made a great choice. But he's trying to you can tell he's emotional about it. He's incredibly excited. He's incredibly grateful and thankful. And Joe Shane is like, That's awesome. I'm gonna pass you off to Dable now. He's like, hey, listen, we really like you. We like all the traits about you. Can't wait to get you. He's like, oh, he's like, yeah, totally. He's like, all right. He's like, you have a good day now.
Tyler,
Like,
Tyler, we already put the pick in. You don't have to
it's like,
sell us anymore.
you've done it. You don't have to convince us anymore.
Yes,
It's not pro day, but
it's
pure
gotta
joy
be.
there. Yeah,
I mean, just I know we're taking it off on a tangent, but it is part of the best part of why the draft is so cool.
of
Because the
course.
second that Joe Shane says, "Hey, this is Joe Shane of the New York Giants," you can hear Tyler Nubin immediately start like getting that choked up feeling in his voice,
Yeah,
knowing that the next words that Joe Shane are going to say is, "Are you ready to be a New York Giant?"
right.
Those are the moments in the draft that just fire you up. I know we're going to talk about Andru Phillips because
Yeah, yeah.
man, a video of him not speaking was almost even more impactful than what Tyler Nubin did. But it is great. The other thing that when they handed the phone off to Brian Dable, he said, "We want you to bring that intangibles. We know that you're a ball hawk." And he says, "We need that leadership from you." That's
Yeah.
another piece of this where it's like he's an older player, he's a veteran, he's instinctual ball hawk leader. He's a guy that is going to come in and work hard, and you're not going to have to corral him or gatekeep him or do anything. He's a great pick for the Giants. I think he fell a little bit because his 40 time wasn't that great. I think he
Yep.
ran a 4.56. So he doesn't have top line speed. I was just in the comments on X talking to different people. You know what's interesting? I think Dan Snyder wrote about this. He follows the Giants very closely. He was saying, top line speed for a safety feels like one of the more overrated attributes that you have. Like, yes, you'd like them to be able to handle a speedster one on one in man coverage, but like it's more about putting yourself in the right place and in the right position. And so, like, if he falls because he has a 4.56 40 time, it's to the benefit of the Giants. And the one thing I'll say to prove that point is Ed Reed is considered one of the greatest football players ever, right? One
Mhm.
of the greatest safeties ever. Felt like he had that instinctual way to just bait quarterbacks into making the wrong choice. You hear Peyton Manning has talked about Ed Reed being the greatest football player he's ever played against. He's like, Ed Reed knew, like, I was going to audible out of this. I was going to try to move this guy
Right.
around.
Right.
Ed Reed was three steps ahead of me, baiting me into making the wrong play. Ed Reed ran a 4.57 40, so he was slower than what Tyler Nubin was. So I think it's to the benefit of the Giants that the 40 time ended up being what it is because we wouldn't have been able to get Tyler Nubin had he ran a 4.45 40 and at the combine.
And remember, too, scheme matters here, right? You're talking about, is this a defense that wants to have the safety playing down at the line of scrimmage and picking up wide receivers? You're going to go zero coverage and bring blitzes and put him into a man-to-man spot on the outside? Well, yeah, then that's going to be a little bit difficult for Tyler Nubin. But if you're talking about setting that table at the back end of this defense, when we look at that depth chart and we see we have Tyler Nubin, they brought in the veteran Jalen Mills, but Pinnock is going to be back there. Dane Belton is the young player that we think we're still trying to bring along, and Joe Shane mentions Javarius Owens as well, coming in with last year's draft class. You have this group now. It's primarily younger players, right? I mean, Jalen Mills, a veteran, but I wouldn't threaten him to be a starter here. But Pinnock has experience, obviously, in this system. So you're talking about young core, a player in Tyler Nubin that I would expect is going to become kind of that vocal leader on the back end of this defense in short order when he gets into training camp. That being the case, let's turn our attention over to Andru Phillips. Let's talk about what he brings to the table, how the draft board unfolded as they worked their way towards pick number 70. And then we'll talk about day 3. What's coming up here for the New York Football Giants and what will be next for them. Some interesting comments from Joe Shane and, well, mostly just Joe Shane. Brian Dable, turns out he did not care about having a press conference whatsoever, but we will get into all of it coming up here in just one moment. All right, so as we flip it over to pick number 70 for the New York Football Giants, we let you know today's live edition of the One Giant Podcast is brought to you by Personam. Personam is, of course, an online cyber threat detection engine. Personam improves your vision into your network security environment and allows you to see cyber threats that other platforms and tools simply cannot do. Personam is always vigilant, always learning. Check it out today to avoid all those dangerous cyber threats. Here's a threat for you. The New York Football Giants are there on day 2. We mentioned the run on cornerbacks. It doesn't quite go their way. Maybe if they're thinking about going in that direction at pick number 47. And then we work our way back towards pick number 70. And at this point, we get into, and by the way, you talk about reaching just very quickly here. The Giants pick at 47. A couple picks behind them is when Mike Sanristil goes, and that's a product out of Michigan that some people liked, 75th overall. So, there's that reach range, right? Almost 30 picks. Now, to be clear, when the Giants come up on the board in round number 3, it's a player they had a top 30 visit with out of Kentucky, Andru Phillips. It's a player that we've talked about over the course of this offseason, really liking who he is as a player. He's 86th on the board, but you come up at 70, you really like it. And I'll ask you, do you think the combination at all with the run on cornerbacks that we saw on day 2 impacted the decision to go and get him right now? Because in my mind, this was not dissimilar to a fellow Kentucky alum, Wan'Dale Robinson, where it was like, yeah, you may have him a little bit lower on your board, but we have him higher. And we actually think we're catching our player falling to us rather than reaching for one.
I do think the Giants thought that there would be more selections with the 47th pick to
Yeah,
be able to get a corner. And then you immediately have to pivot from that and don't reach on someone with that pick. And so obviously that's how Tyler Nubin ends up being a Giant. The issue, Adam, is if you go past the 70th pick and you don't have a corner, you're starting to get into some strange territory where you're going to maybe have to take multiple flyers in the 5th and 6th round. And the Giants still have a ton of areas of need.
of
I
course.
think because Joe Shane brought in Andru Phillips for a top 30 visit, they were familiar with him. They're sitting there saying, is he going to be around when we pick again? Is he going to be there for the 107th pick? Probably not. So if we want him, now is the time to do it. Yes, could we trade back and get cute? Sure, maybe we'll pick up an additional pick. But guess what? We just sat there and waited in the 2nd round and we lost out on all of the corners. We need a corner. He is still there and he's a guy that we've done our homework on. Let's go ahead and make the selection, set it and forget it, and bring a guy in that we're confident can compete day one.
Yeah, and so let's talk about him first and foremost, and then we'll break down the board here because there's a very good reason why the Giants took him when they did, even regardless of having him in for the visit. First of all, we understand nice product here. When we talk about coming out of Kentucky. You mentioned this the other day. It's like, are the Giants maybe trying to slowly build a bit of a pipeline through Kentucky? Well, this makes a second player coming out of Kentucky, obviously with Wan'Dale Robinson going back 2 seasons ago for Joe Shane. 5'11", 190 pounds. Now, we didn't talk about this going into day number 2. Joe Shane mentioned this in the press conference. Now, he said most likely will start in the slot, probably start on the inside, can also play on the outside, but you're looking at a guy that's going to primarily line up in the slot position here to start his career for the New York Football Giants. Again, not dissimilar to Nubin, instinctual kind of player, seems to understand the game from an IQ level. And my premise here is that the Giants believe the mental acumen is what's actually going to help to make up for being just 190 pounds, right? Listed at 5'11", might be closer to 5'9", not entirely sure. But you like the baseline package you're getting with him. Unlike Nubin, 0 interceptions in his collegiate career. And Joe Shane spoke to that saying, yeah, obviously you want to see him improve that, but it's more than just interceptions. And that's something I saw a lot of people point out on X. Oh, no interceptions. What is going to happen? Well, if you prevent receivers from catching passes, that is still an important part of playing defense. Yes, turnovers are great, but that's kind of the package that we like from Andru Phillips coming in here.
Yeah, listen, Andru Phillips. We talked about the familiarity with the coaching staff and the team. It just felt like a natural fit for the Giants here. They obviously needed cornerback help. He's got good size at him. Obviously, he's not necessarily the biggest guy in the draft. I think he's 5'11", 190 pounds, but he's big and he's sturdy and strong. You know, you hear Joe Shane and they asked him afterwards about drafting Andru Phillips, and he said, where do you think he's going to sit, start immediately? Are you going to put him on the outside with Deonte Banks? And he said, well, actually, it makes more sense to have Cordell Flott play outside and have Andru Phillips kind of in that nickel, up in the box type because of his size and physicality. So it's interesting already that they're saying the way that they're envisioning this is Deonte Banks and Cordell Flott on the outside. Andru Phillips can kind of do it all, but because he is so sturdy and strong, he really does help out in the run game and as well as against some of the bigger tight ends.
Big part of it is the run support, right? A willing guy to get his nose in there and help defend against that as well. So you talk about him coming off the edge. You can think about him in blitz packages too. Go back and watch the tape at Kentucky. Does a really nice job of hugging that edge, getting pressure on the quarterback, getting pressure on the running back on handoffs as well. Yeah. And, listen, it's not a knock on Cordell Flott, but when he first came in, it was, well, because you want to line up at the inside, the slot position based on who you had there. You had, obviously, Adoree Jackson. But then year over year, you do see him, and in a positive way, well, he's a little bit longer, he's a little bit leaner, he has a little bit of that quickness. Maybe we can put him on the outside. So versatility inside of Shane Bowen's defense matters here. But to your point, it looks like we're starting to understand who's going to start where and when. And you want that to be complementary while still having the opportunity. Hey, depending on matchups, guy gets kicked outside, more length, more speed, more size on the slot. You can hopefully have these interchangeable pieces with Phillips and with Flott.
Yeah, and I just wanted to highlight if there's a simple way, and you're like, well, what's the 30-second that I'm at a family barbecue tomorrow, and someone asked me about Andrew Phillips. NFL Draft Buzz does a great job of doing
Yes.
a quick summary.
Yep.
What they said about Andrew Phillips is Andrew Phillips flashes a toolkit ripe with pro caliber traits: twitchy athleticism, fluid
Mm-hmm.
hits, and a voracious appetite for run support. So,
Yep.
like, he's got twitchy athleticism. He wants to put his head down, get into the box, and help the Giants in the run defense. I mean, what's not to like at the 70th pick, especially knowing how the board fell for them in the second round? This seems like a really good contingency plan for getting one of those top line guys in the second that didn't fall to them.
And let's be clear here too. A lot of people even brought up too, said, "Oh, this is a fifth or sixth round pick that people are looking at." But if you go read the write ups, he was a guy that was consistently rising throughout the draft process, the combine, the pro days, the visits. Like, he was a name that was ascending. Now, whether or not the Giants liked him more than some other teams, of course, that's always the nature of it. But this was not a sixth round pick that the Giants went out of their minds here and drafted in the third round. This was someone that had continually risen over the course of it. And oh, by the way, this is the other thing I want to get into here from a total draft perspective. So we know the Giants take Andrew Phillips at pick number 70. Now, there's another player that we want to talk about here when we get into day 3, and that's going to be a falling cornerback who has not been even remotely sniffed around, it seems, by NFL teams. The next cornerback that comes off the board in the third round, I have to go all the way down to 2 players, and one of which that I did like, Elijah Jones out of Boston College. Guess what, though? 128 on the big board. Now, he was another name, 162, 185-pound, big body guy. So he could be on the rise, too. But 128. Then you go down to another Jones in Jarian, who's out of Florida State. He was a 235th prospect overall on ESPN's big board, 6 foot, buck 90. So if you think about the idea, that's it. Those are the 2 that go there in the draft. And then moving forward in terms of best available, we understand we're going to have this discussion in a moment about where that board lands. But just think about that. That's 2 other teams that need to and want to add cornerback talent, and they end up taking looks at players that maybe are back end 4th round talents, that are, back end 6th round talents. The Giants took a player at 86, to your point. Is he going to be there at 107? Fat chance. And are we going to want to have to spend, even if we like him a lot, a bunch of assets to get up there to get him if he was going to fall closer to the 80 to 90 range? No, we're here now. It's a player of value. And when you think about this secondary overall, I just think that, you and I had this maybe flip-flopped about maybe it was going to be cornerback early, and then at 70, I said, oh, Jaden Hicks, if he's going to be there for you, right? You go get that player. But it makes a lot of sense to me. Like, after it's all settled, of course, it makes a lot of sense that the Giants said, we need multiple pieces in the defensive secondary. This is not solved yet. And as good as our defensive front is, and even though we add Brian Burns, if we don't bring in another couple of significant bodies, especially losing Xavier McKinney, we're going to find ourselves having a similar discussion. Boy, we're really good at the point of attack, but at the end of the games in crunch time, we end up giving up these big chunk plays that cost us.
Yeah, listen, Bleacher Report, quick synopsis from them. They gave an A on the Tyler Nubin pickup. Obviously, was one of the top ranked safeties on most people's boards. After Xavier McKinney's departure, there's clearly an area of need there. You kind of like what you're seeing in the safety room now with Jalen Mills, Jason Pinnock, Dame Belton, and now Tyler Nubin. You feel like they really have solidified the back end of their secondary. Now they give the Andrew Phillips draft grade a C, and they basically say, he's raw and needs a lot of technical refinement, but his explosive traits can't be taught. So you're like, yeah, of course. Like,
Give me the baseline. Give me the baseline. I trust the coaching staff. You give me the baseline skills, and I know I can build on. Excellent. You know what I can't coach up? Tight hips and a lack of fluidity, or someone that doesn't have instinctual play, right? Okay, he's a bit of a raw talent you want to refine, but he has all the baseline, right?
Yes, exactly. And listen, if you want to get fired up about Andrew Phillips being a Giant, we mentioned it at the top of the show. Go to the New York Giants social media and watch the video of him getting drafted. Adam, I got choked up, man. I cannot tell a lie. Andrew Phillips is sitting with his family wearing sunglasses, and you can hear that they turn the TV up, and he knows that his name is about to be called. And you can just see it. He doesn't even move, but you can feel that he is overcome with emotion. And when they call his name, his whole entire family is going nuts. And you have Andrew Phillips just sitting there, stone cold. He puts his head down for a second, he puts it back up, and you could see that like he doesn't know what to do with his body. Like everything that he has worked for has come to this moment. You want a guy that is a freak athlete that has that instinctual, like,
Mhm.
I just want to run through a brick wall for whoever ends up picking me. I got really excited seeing that. Some people may say, well, Andy, that doesn't mean anything on the field. It does to me. This guy cares. The Giants vetted him out. He's got the athleticism. Now it's on the coaching staff to be able to coach the most out of him. I like both of these picks. They were areas of need for the Giants, especially with Adoree Jackson and Xavier McKinney going out. They at least addressed two parts of the defense while addressing the wide receiver room in round one.
We're going to go ahead and talk about what we look at on day number 3 here, and also to give 2 footnotes about Andrew Phillips and about Tyler Nubin, one physical and one off field, just to clarify all that information. And then we'll say, where does the board stand here as we move forward, and what do we expect the Giants to look at to round out their roster as we close out the 2024 NFL draft? We'll get into that in just one moment. Okay, so the 2 footnotes just quickly here. One on Andrew Phillips. There was a gun possession charge, something along those lines in his background. It was completely dismissed. A lawsuit was brought. When they were asked about it in the press conference, Joe Shane dismissed it fairly quickly, as you would expect the GM to do. But it didn't seem like there was any level of concern in or around that. And again, without being a detective 101 here, it seemed like the impression was whatever the involvement was superfluous or fringe at best, and his name was pulled into this thing. That's okay. We'll continue to flesh that out if it matters, anything to that extent. Beyond that, Andy, go ahead, go with Phillips here first, and then I'll hit the Tyler Nubin.
Well, the gun possession charges that were dropped was against Malik Neighbors in Louisiana and Baton
Oh, sorry.
Rouge.
Yeah, what's the one with Phillips?
So Andrew Phillips, 6 Kentucky players were going to be charged with burglary charges.
Burglary.
They
I'm sorry.
decided
Yes,
to
burglary.
not move forward, and they were cleared by a grand jury. So that kind of ended up moving on. It was in March of 2021, an incident at an off-campus party that was happening. But they
Right.
were cleared. Grand jury said nope. So kind of moved on from that. Just good to note that the Giants did their due diligence. It may even be one of the reasons why Andrew Phillips gets brought in for a top 30 visit. And Joe
Hey,
Shane looks
we
at him
really
and says,
like
"Hey,
you.
tell me
Yeah, we
what
really
happened."
like you, but what's going on?
Yeah, what happened there? And if it all passes the test, the Giants are like, okay, we feel comfortable if the time comes to be able to call his name. This is exactly how top 30 visits work, and it seems to have worked here. But yeah, just a little bit of housekeeping on the back end. Maybe one of the reasons why other teams shied away. The Giants did their homework and they felt confident in both Malik Neighbors and Andrew Phillips, where other people may have said, "Huh, what are those things that happened off the field that I need to question about?"
And of course, you know what I mean? It's 2021, and these are young kids and players. And I remember my youth, and it's, you know what I mean? A lot of things go on. And it doesn't mean you dismiss any of it, but you try to give a little bit of understanding around these individual circumstances. What do you got?
Adam, I
Yeah.
was just going to say in the chat, DJ is the Terminator came in and said, I think many are learning that you should go best player available when you have a lot of holes. It's almost impossible not to try to fill them when you can. This is exactly what we're talking about. Once the
Yep.
run on cornerbacks happened, the Giants had to pivot and say, who's the best player on our board? Oh, I know safety might feel a little early, but Tyler Nubin is the best player that we
Yeah.
have. It's an area of need. Let's take the best player available here and not reach. And look, to me, it seems like it worked out by flip flopping cornerback and safety. They got 2 guys that they feel really comfortable in, and that is the strategy that the Giants should have in the second and third round. And also, as we move into this day 3, Adam, they're going to have to look at who's on their big board, best players available. They still do have some areas of need that they need to address.
Of course. And just quickly on Tyler Nubin, meniscus was his concern with his injury. Played through it at Minnesota. It ends up being one of the things that Joe Shane and Brian Dable point to is actually really loving about it. Didn't want to not be on the field with his teammates, wanted to be out there playing. Probably did hamper him a little bit, but you didn't hear a word one from him about it. No concerns about that. Although noteworthy, just, you think the Giants probably want to stay away from injury concerned players. You assume the medicals are all clear with him. Now, as we turn our attention to the remainder of this board and the draft. So one thing, I'll throw out this question immediately to Andy because it really does fascinate me. TJ Tampa is the falling cornerback here out of Iowa State, 46th overall on the big board, 6'1", 189. A solid. I don't know if I ever looked at him and said, oh, this is a guy at 47 that I think the Giants should take. He was never top on my list of cornerbacks, but I find it fascinating that he's still sitting out there, even though you would say, well, Cordell Flott, he's going to play on the outside, etc. I find it very curious as the Giants start to come up here, and a guy like Cam Hart is going to be there. 100 players taken in the first 3 rounds with compensatories to go along with it. 9th available is Cam Hart. Any chance, just very quickly, any chance you think the Giants would go back into the cornerback pool if they felt like an outside corner was available for them? It'd be an acknowledgement that Cordell Flott hasn't necessarily worked out, but based on where you took Cordell Flott, you have to bring in bodies here. I do find it interesting if the talent is there and we're talking about best player available.
Adam, it's a good question. My answer to you would be I just don't think the Giants would dip in there for 2 reasons. One is that they already have addressed the cornerback position with Andru Phillips. You may say, well, they need at least another corner. Great, but at least they solidified a guy that could be a potential starter out of the gate, right?
100%. Yeah, my only reason to ask it is if you believe Andru Phillips is best suited in the slot, then the biggest offseason we thought about was like one of the top needs was, well, the outside corner across from Banks. So you would say if you think in-house it's Flott, great. But in theory, we wouldn't say that they've addressed the outside corner need at this point.
No, I agree. The second piece of it is, Adam, the Giants had 2 opportunities to take TJ Tampa, and they decided not to take TJ Tampa. They could have taken him
Yeah.
at 47 and said, we need that corner desperately. And then they could have taken him at 70 and said, well, Andru Phillips is kind of a reach. TJ Tampa's falling to us. Let's take this guy that we have. Clearly, they didn't have TJ Tampa ranked that highly on their board,
No.
or else he would be a New York Giant with the 70th pick. So for me, for whatever reason, it feels like the Giants have shown 2 times in a row, we have other areas of need or we don't have TJ Tampa ranked as highly. It feels like there's other areas of need for the Giants on this board.
Yeah, Cam Hart would be the guy that I'd actually be looking at even over Tampa here if we talk about pick 107 for the New York Football Giants. Now, when you go and look at some of those top 30 visits, a lot of guys like Cooper Beebe, he went just after the Giants to the Dallas Cowboys a couple picks later. We saw Ben Sinnott. He's also gone off the board there. He was the 93rd overall, came in for a visit as well. By the way, Patrick Paul, 132 on the board. I thought, hey, 107, that's the perfect spot. I talked about him ahead of the draft. He's gone. Like he went miles ahead. So you're seeing play, as you mentioned, it's not just best player available based on the overall board. It's your board. Where do you have these players ranked? You don't care. I took at 70. We took the cornerback that you think is 86 or 102. Doesn't matter. He was up there for us on our board. Who are some of the names you like then if we expand away from the secondary? Offensive line, maybe still a depth need here, although I'm doubting now whether or not the Giants are going to go offensive line at this point, maybe not until 166 or 183 if we're thinking specifically 107 to start.
So there's 3 picks left for the Giants in the draft, Adam.
That's right.
Those 3 picks are pick 107 in the 4th round.
I thought you were going to, wow. You know what, just real quick, I thought you were going to say those 3 picks are, and then give me 3 very specific names and be like, so don't even bother watching the draft on day 3. I got you covered.
If you want that, I'm happy to provide you who the Giants are going to pick. Talked to Joe Shane earlier. He said, just please don't tell anyone. Like, don't go on a podcast and say anything. So hopefully this doesn't reach the
interwebs. We're all friends here, though.
But listen, the Giants have pick 107 in the 4th round, 166 in the 5th round, and 183 in the 6th round. So they have a pick coming up in each of the next rounds. The challenge, Adam, is the gap between pick 107 and 166 is rather large. I was looking at certain players and I'm like, man, I wish we had 2 picks in like the next 20 picks because there's so many guys that are going to be gone by the time you pick again at 166. That
we're talking trade back?
I could see an opportunity for the Giants to try to get back in and get a few players that they want, knowing that they have not utilized any draft capital to move up for Drake May or move up in the 2nd round to get another cornerback. What if they ship another 6th round pick or something next year to be able to go up and get the guys that they want this year? So keep that in mind. I think it's a distinct possibility, knowing that there are still tons of holes. Now, my perfect way to go through this over the next 3 picks is to address 3 different positions.
What's your position for 107?
Well, I mean, this is the difficult.
Oh, you're saying in totality, you want to get these.
In totality, I want them to address 3 different spots on this roster, and I will feel like it has been successful.
Andy wants a running back at some point in here.
That is correct.
He also wants a tight end somewhere in here.
That is correct.
And he probably does still want the offensive line.
That is correct.
Come on. Ding, ding, ding. We don't even do pre-show. We don't even do pre-show.
It feels like with the uncertainty around Darren Waller, the fact that Saquon Barkley has left and who is running the football, is Eric Gray running the football behind Devin Singletary? Like, I don't know. I think I'd probably want to maybe take a flyer on someone. And we talk about the interior offensive line. We're not really sure where Evan Neal's going to play. It feels like a guard could be something that is really, really interesting. So I know if the Giants end up taking a running back, you have someone in mind that you feel like would be kind of a knock it out of the park. If you would rather me talk about tight end or interior offensive line, I got two names for you that I think are really interesting.
Start with tight end here, just because when we're talking about, you look at the board right now, best available players, there are multiple tight ends right now that would be available or could fall, obviously, here as the day 3 starts off here, whether it's Sanders out of Texas, whether it's going to be Stover, who we talked a lot about leading up to this draft. He's there out of Ohio State as well. So go with tight end. Would you? And here's the funny part. I mentioned those guys because Andy has typically been more of a deep cut player when it comes to the tight end position. So I don't even know if I don't even think he's going to go with those top 2 guys. I bet he's going to tell me something around like 166 is where he targets a tight end.
Well, it's tough. I'll tell you. So when we talk about specifically the tight end group, you mentioned some of the guys that are higher up on the tight end list. Jatavian Sanders is one guy that is right up there. He's the second ranked tight end behind Brock Bowers. I am not interested in Jatavian Sanders. And I'm not interested because while he is 6'4", 245, he does not block anyone. Literally does not block anyone. He is a very one-dimensional tight end. He is actually, his comp is very similar to a Darren Waller type player, where it's like you can set him out wide. He's explosive. He's an amazing player. A huge catch radius, really causes problems for the defense. As a tight end, he gave up 3 sacks when he was asked to block. He gave up 4 pressures when he was asked to block, and he wasn't even actually asked to block all that often, considering he's not very good at it. And so the challenge is 5-star recruit, can catch the ball, huge catch radius, awesome pass catcher, but it doesn't feel like that's what the Giants are necessarily targeting when they think about a tight end. They want a capable and willing run blocker and pass blocker. So I'm just right out of the gate saying Jatavian Sanders is not someone for me.
I'm gonna tell the people who Andy's pick is here. I'm gonna go on a limb. It's also it's my pick, or at least a player that I really like. Theo Johnson, Penn State. I think that he is a excellent tight end prospect for the Giants. 125 on the big board. Don't know if it's 107 worthy. Maybe make that margin move from 166, but he fits the mold. Willing blocker, big body guy, and someone that has like the fundamental pieces, and the production is low coming out of college. But again, same kind of thing. All the skills are there. Think the tight end of Andru, the Andru Phillips of tight ends. Okay, the stats aren't quite all there, but we believe that he can be built into that kind of player.
You are absolutely right. He's number 104 on the big board on NFL Draft Buzz. They have him 104. The other boards have him at 125. 6'6", 259. Great. He has great hands, Adam. When he was asked to catch the ball, he is a great pass catcher. You can put him out and just have him run routes, or you could keep him in line and make him a run blocker or the deception of play action. He is a willing blocker, and he's only going to get better with coaching. To me, he would be a great pick. We don't know the status of Darren Waller. We do like Dane Belton. We know Lawrence Cager has been here before and others. It would be nice to get a big-bodied tight end so that if Darren Waller does not come back, the idea of Daniel Bellinger and Theo Johnson makes too much sense for the New York Giants. I saw Art Stapleton, beat writer for the Giants, mention his name. I saw Dan Duggan, beat writer for the Giants for The Athletic, mention his name. Everyone is circling Theo Johnson as a perfect fit for the Giants. I feel the same way. So if they're going to address the tight end, it's one of those things where it's like, do you take him at 107? Do you try to take another area of need, thinking that he could still be there with all the tight ends that are on the board and try to trade back in? But to me, he's a player that the Giants are going to be targeting in the 4th or 5th round.
Okay, so as we turn our attention over to running back here, I will quickly just say, you want a deep cut from me, watching the combine and liking the way this player performed, go look at Dallin Holker, Colorado State. He's near 200 on the big board right now. So if you're talking about maybe the Giants feel they have other areas of need, or best player available becomes more significant, maybe Darren Waller is a little bit closer to sticking around, whatever the case may be, he'd be a player where, hey, we're going to add to it when we can. We brought in some players this offseason. Nice guy to keep an eye on here as well. I'll take a look here. We got a Jordan Travis shout out as well from Devin Griffin in the chat as well. Okay, now let's flip it over to running back here, because there's 2 players for me. There's the one that I think is absolutely the sexiest possible pick that you could make at 107 if he's going to fall there for you. He currently sits there as being the best running back available in the draft. That's Jalen Wright out of Tennessee. He has 4.38 40 time. and you go and look and think about that you have 3 wide receivers right now that are 4.4 sub 40 times, it just feels like, man, you have Devin Singletary there. You have that, physical between the tackle kind of running back. Go get another weapon. Go turn this offense in one draft class, turn this offensive unit over and make it incredibly dynamic in the blink of an eye. Now, I have another running back, a deeper cut if you want to go that way, but it just seems really hard, man. I don't think you and I did not suspect that he would be here at this point necessarily. 97 on ESPN's, but we knew that the running back class in general was going to take a while to start to see that roll off the board.
Adam, when you talk about speed, you just can't teach speed. Imagine the speed of Jalen Hyatt, Malik Neighbors, and Jalen Wright all on the field at the same time with
Yeah.
Wan'Dale Robinson and shiftiness in the slot. Like,
yeah,
for whatever you think of the quarterback position, it is dangerous weapons all over the field. Imagine them running motions and jet sweeps and reverse plays with that type of speed. It's
Yep.
just something you can't teach. I think it is a nice compliment to Devin Singletary. Now, we talk about his usage in college and the simplicity of the Tennessee offense. Jalen Wright
Yep.
didn't really get to showcase all of his skills. Keep in mind, Adam, the Dallas Cowboys still desperately need a running back and are going to be drafting behind the New York Giants. If you leave someone like that to another team, you open it up to the Giants having to face that type of speed on a regular basis. The one thing I will say is it does feel like the running back position is deep and you just don't know
Yep.
when the run is going to come. And so for me, like if you said Audric Estime from Nyack, New York,
Of
local
course.
guy,
Local
Notre
product.
Dame product, he's a guy that you could plug and play immediately. He's a little bit of a slow plotter, 4.7, 140, doesn't really have the top line speed. But then you also have Isaac Guerendo from Louisville, who has 4.33 type speed. He's a 5th round guy. Bucky Irving is there in the 5th round. So it almost, Braylon Allen's another guy with 4.40 speed. You're talking about a lot of guys that are still there. And at 107, are you saying, should we need to get our guy now? Or do you say, maybe we take Theo Johnson, maybe we take the interior offensive lineman and take one of those running backs later on with one of our picks?
Yeah, and this is the part of it, man. You mentioned the one player there who he was initially the guy that I brought up because I've been of the mindset later is when you'll go get this running back. Why do you go get Singletary? So you don't have to feel like you press to replace Saquon Barkley immediately. Isaac Guerendo, you said 4.33 speed. Yeah, he's 6 foot, 221 pounds, man. He
It's
takes
insane.
on hits at the point of attack, right? Like he's a physical runner. He's not the perfect prospect, right? It takes him a little while to get up to speed there. But when you talk about body strength and just being able to bring in essentially another wrecking ball, like if I think about it in terms of you can go ultra dynamic Jalen Wright style and have everybody and all these weapons and all this speed. And by the way, again, Isaac has speed as well. But I just like the idea of when you bring in a change, we're going to change up from Singletary. You bring in a dude that will literally blow up a linebacker as he's getting outside the hashes and still has that speed to get up to that level and go ahead and break off some big chunks. I like him a lot. And he's 146 on ESPN. I don't know. I doubt that in mocks that I did, he initially made it to 166 and then slowly stopped making it there. So again, overall for running backs, do you make that margin move up to get a player like that? But I love him. And when you mention that group overall, there's some nice wait and see. And 166, you probably find a really good value.
Yeah, the Giants brought in Audric Estime from Notre Dame for a top 30 visit. They like him. The
Yeah.
challenge that I have with him is I like him as a player. I don't like him as the complementary piece necessarily in the running back room.
Yeah.
You may
Yeah.
say, "Oh, well, he can just ground and pound, hand it to him up the middle. He's a big bruiser." It's like, well, Eric Gray ran a 4.62 40. He's not necessarily a speedster or a burner. You expect Devin Singletary to be the guy that kind of takes the lion's share of runs and takes some of the big hits. I kind of want a guy that has game-changing speed, right? It feels like in the backfield, that would be a nice complement to what they have already. And that's where we really talk about, Guerendo is one of them. I think Braylon Allen has 4.40 speed. There's a handful of guys that you sit there and say, Jalen Wright, obviously 4.38. Those feel like they would complement a little bit better in the running back room. But I do believe the Giants will address the running back position in one of these next 3 picks.
double dip maybe at Kentucky if you want to. Ray Davis is the second best running back currently on the board, 129 on ESPN's. Okay, overall then we say tight end, we say running back. If we're talking about best player available, anybody here, well, we can just stay specifically around 107 as we get into this. Is there someone there that you feel like is available, maybe at a surprising position? I'll throw out the idea that a player like this would be, again, just talking about it's just a weapon and we want to add weapons. Troy Franklin, 6'2", 176, out of Oregon, wide receiver. You'd say, do we need another wide receiver? Joe Shane addressed that they already gave the roster bonus to Darius Slayton, so the likelihood of him being moved seems less. But I'm just pointing out players, man. When you start to look at these boards, and it's at a certain point, Brendan Rice is right behind him there, by the way, 2 picks back. Obviously, Jerry's son, 6'2", 208. Anywhere you want to go, any position. But it's just when you look there, there's still a lot of talent. I'm sure you want to highlight a couple of offensive linemen as well.
Someone in the chat, Ken, you just get it. You just get it. You and me, like-minded people.
Mahogany, thick like wood.
Yes. Rich Mahogany, actually. Rich Mahogany.
Oh, come on. Is that his first name?
No. Imagine it was.
So sweet. Oh, never mind.
His apartment.
Honestly, we're at the end of the podcast right now. I thought his name. How could you not name your kid Rich if his last name's Mahogany and he seems like he has the measurables to play offensive line?
No, I mean that is actually hilarious. But his name is Christian Mahogany. He is an offensive guard from Boston College.
I'm not as impressed anymore.
You're not as impressed. I am impressed. I am impressed from what I've seen about him and the type of player that he is. He is a willing run blocker. He is excellent in the run game. He has really good size, and he has the potential to be a starting guard for you for years to come. The reason why he sat around for so long is because he really needs to get better with his footwork. While he is a really capable run stopper or run blocker in the run game, his footwork isn't great against edge rushers. Counter moves seem to get him a little bit. So that speed in the NFL, he has to figure out how to get his footwork better. That's on Carmen Bursillo. That's why you bring in an offensive line coach like you did. But Adam, I was messaging with Art Stapleton, beat writer of NorthJersey.com. I said, doesn't Christian Mahogany make sense in the third round? He said, not necessarily a priority in the third. Keep in mind, the Giants and Joe Shane had a local visit with Christian Mahogany, brought him in to have some discussions, are familiar with him. Adam, just when you think about where he is, on NFL Draft Buzz, of the top 24 offensive linemen that are rated there, he is the only one that is still available on the big board.
Yeah.
Currently, ESPN has him as the 48th best player that's still remaining. So there is a wide margin of opinions on where he sits. Do the Giants sit there and hope that he's still there, with their fifth round pick? Do they say we need interior offensive line help and move him at 107? It feels like between multiple places, he could go anywhere in the fourth or the fifth round. It's all about prioritization. But Adam, I'm telling you, Jalen Wright is a great call out. Theo Johnson, the tight end from Penn State, feels like a guy the Giants want. And I think Christian Mahogany is another player that the Giants should look at. If the Giants walked away with Theo Johnson, Jalen Wright, and Christian Mahogany, you may as well just go like this and be like, are you not entertained? Like the Gladiator piece of it where he kind of throws the sword up at Joaquin Phoenix. But to me, that's my game plan. How would that land to you if the Giants walked away with 1, 2, or all 3 of those players?
Oh, listen, yeah. I how could you knock it? I think the Theo Johnson and Jalen Wright would seem electric because you're addressing big areas of need. I think that adding anything across the offensive line, the one thing I'll mention is because we like Cooper Beebe, obviously. We talked about players higher in the draft that the Giants could look at. I think fundamentally, so here's the one thing that I really did think about, even beyond top 30 visits. If you think about as Andy would say, follow the money. Well, where did the Giants spend money in the offseason? Offensive line, they went ahead and brought in 2 veterans. Doesn't mean it's the long-term future, but they brought in guys to stabilize that. Brian Burns, you trade for him, you give him a massive contract. Linebacker, edge rusher, front core, right? Where did they not spend money in the offseason? In the secondary. Where did they not spend money in the offseason? At the wide receiver position. So, obviously, top of the board, we get Malik Neighbors, right? We go and we get ourselves a safety. We get ourselves a cornerback. So, I try to look at those. Tight end would be, yes, you spent some money in free agency, but how much? That's kind of how I looked at it too, though. What were they not able to address, and what would you want to see them go out and get? So, does it make me shy away a little bit from 107 and Jalen Wright just being what I think the Giants will go do? Of course. But those type of players, man, you listed it. There's 3 or 4 really solid running backs that I'd be happy to have there. Tight ends, I think there's plenty of options there as well. So for me, Mahogany, I think is a great call too. When you get that type of top talent, it looks like on the board overall that's fallen, absolutely elite. The only wrinkle that I'll throw in here as we start to wind ourselves down is just think about the board overall and what is going to be just the positional value. And this is where I would say look inside the defensive tackle position. I think that they still want to add depth there. I think they want to continue to build what is one of their strengths. Mekhi Wingo out of LSU is certainly a possibility, though that's higher on the board here. I think you'd have to take him at 107, obviously, but you go down there a little bit more. There's a couple other of guys that I really did like as well. Christian Boyd would be another one out of Northern Iowa, 155, 6'4", 317 pounder. So I would throw out just that positional value, probably 166, 183, not talking about 107, but you have to look at that and think the Giants want to bolster what's been strong for them and still an area that they did not go out and sign anyone in free agency, lost Leonard Williams, lost Robinson from last year too. So, they have young players in that room, but they did not bring in any other talent there.
Yeah, I agree. The interior defensive line is important. It is definitely something that the Giants should consider. I'd be happy if they addressed it here. You mentioned the wide receiver room. I think that is an interesting one. But the Giants have shown throughout their top 30 visits and otherwise that they were going to be looking at the top of the draft for a wide receiver, and then they were going to be looking for the fringe preferred free agent signing type guys. I highlighted specifically Tajon Palmer of UAB as a guy I could totally see the Giants saying, we have other areas of need. Let's get Palmer on the phone and explain to him, the second the draft is over, we want you to come to New York. We're going to give you a little bit of extra money. And he rounds out the wide receiver room. And you have Bryce Ford Wheaton, you have Tajon Palmer, you have all these guys that are complimentary looking to backfill the wide receiver room. I absolutely think that's the way the Giants go. Look for Tajon Palmer as a guy. Right as everything concludes, there's going to be a frenzy, Adam, of all these guys that didn't get drafted. He is one of the guys that you will likely see the Giants end up bringing in.
2 players in that regard at the cornerback position. We think you want to bring in another player, but you're not going to necessarily invest in the next 3 picks in. Chow Smith-Wade out of Washington State, 227 overall ranked cornerback. And then a guy that I really like, at least to bring in. He's 365 on the big board, so you didn't want to spend it at the first round, 6th overall. But Chigozie and Anaseum, out of Colorado State. I like him. Again, you go look at these prospects. There's a reason why they're lower on draft boards, but there seems like there's something there in terms of fundamentally having some of those core traits that you want if you're the Giants. And again, top 30 visits. So to Andy's point, these aren't guys that you're talking about getting picked inside of the draft, but you want to establish those relationships so that as the draft is winding down, you say, hey, man, as soon as that final pick, Mr. Irrelevant, goes in, we're going to be on the phone to you. We're going to try to get these players into the building. And then you get into the off season and all these bodies are in camp and you see how things shake out. I will just add into that wide receiver group too, if he were to fall out of the draft, seems unlikely, 211 on ESPN's big board, Cornelius Johnson out of Michigan. Talk about all the traits, 6'3", 212, big body guy, has all the traits and just needs the team to bring him in and develop him, continue to bring him along, probably in a Bryce Ford Wheaton kind of mold, right? But just bring in a body like that. So I agree with you. Wide receiver, listen, I don't know what player would be on the Giants board where they go, oh my God, I can't believe that this guy is here. You already got Neighbors as well. So I would push that one back. Running back, I think, is situational value for the Giants. Tight end, fringe, and I think this BPA kind of mentality probably matters here as well. Anybody else, Andy, before we button this one up, that you want to have on the minds of Giants fans? And I think this is BPA, position doesn't matter, just great talent in the draft right now.
I mean, who says it better than New Yorker in the chat that says, I want right now? I mean, come on. It's a clever pun. It's a guy that we've highlighted.
It's no Rich Mahogany, but the guy's doing work. I mean, you got to at least try.
I do really think that the running back room is important for the Giants to address. Braylon Allen is a name that I just want to keep at the tip of the tongue. He is a freak athlete. At Wisconsin, he's a guy that you could plug in immediately and give carries to, and you'd be pretty happy. He's got 4.40 speed. I do think, Adam, they have to address the running back position. It's just a matter of where. Is it more value in the 5th round, knowing there's 6 or 7 guys out there, or have you identified that Jalen Wright has this elite speed? And also, Is Jalen Hyatt in the ear, like texting Joe Shane, being like, "Bring him home"? Like, come on, we need another guy from Tennessee. Maybe Wan'Dale Robinson was doing that with Andrew Phillips, but man, what a game changer Wright would be
Maybe John
if
Michael Schmitz was
he
doing
ended.
that with Tyler Nubin. Dude, the connections, buddy, the connections are happening all around here. So yeah, listen, I really like it. And there's going to be things when this wraps up, when the draft concludes come Monday morning. We'll talk about all the final picks that the Giants made, obviously, break down how it fits, and then get right back into free agency. We're seeing there someone like the New Yorker throwing out back into the cornerback vet after the draft. Yeah, there's names that we've talked about, right? Wallace, formerly of Pittsburgh. I think there's plenty of names out there for the Giants to go and bring in veteran talent across the entire roster. So going to be interesting to see here. Running back, tight end, offensive line depth. That's where we think this team is going to go over their final 3 picks. We're going to go ahead and follow us on X if you're out there, because we'll put our list together here. We'll mild variations. I think we'll have like a 2-player variation here across our 6 total guys that we'll give you to look at over these final 3 rounds. 3 rounds? 4, 5, 6, 7. 4 rounds. I got there. In the end, I got there. 3 picks.
3 picks,
New
4
York
rounds.
Football Giants, obviously trying to get this thing locked up, trying to improve this roster, and then we'll start to break down what it all means for them as they work towards their offseason. Get us on YouTube where you're watching us right now. Turn on the alerts so you know when we're going live. We have really appreciated everyone that comes and supports morning sessions for OGP fan base. I love it. You can get us on X at AMAC214, at Adam Armbrecht, and at One Giant Podcast. Of course, we will be talking and chatting it up all throughout the draft the rest of the weekend, and then breaking it down bright and early Monday morning, how Big Blue helped turn the corner on this franchise going forward. Until next time, though, until the best times. As Andrew Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand that people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.
Surprise! If you stuck around, Andy and I in the background having a conversation and figured why not an extra 5 here? Because, Andy, we've got a few extra minutes on Saturday morning. There's other names that like we could discuss, or more importantly, I think the bonus 5 here for me is, what did the Giants accomplish in those first 3 picks for this team? And do you feel like when we go back and think about, here's a roster, here is a team that has all these holes on it, that's projected for 6.5 over under win totals, does it move the needle for you when you look at these picks? You mentioned some grades earlier. Like, we don't need to talk about grades for these guys, but do you think that this is moving this team in a direction where you go, oh, I can see a game from last year that you go win now? And even beyond the league neighbors, obviously. But when you think about the secondary, right? Like, oh, this defense can get that stop now that maybe they couldn't a year ago.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the way that I think about it is, if the draft were to end today and the
Right now.
Giants were going to go in with this roster, where would you say the weaknesses are? And I think the Giants going into this, we knew they needed a top line wide receiver. Obviously, quarterback was a very polarizing thing, whether they were going to get their guy or not. But clearly, wide receiver and cornerback, and with Xavier McKinney leaving in the safety position, were the 3 areas that I felt the Giants absolutely needed to get someone. They addressed them early. It feels like this allows them to take that best player available approach moving forward. I think we can all agree, and we were mentioning this on X last night. I think we can all agree that like the ship has sailed on the quarterback position, and drafting one late.
Gosh, I hope so.
I mean, Spencer Rattler is still sitting out there, and it's a name that people keep kicking the tires on. He's the 17th ranked player on the big board. Obviously, he's someone that thought he was going to get his name called in maybe the 2nd or the 3rd round, depending if a QB needy team wanted him. They haven't so far. And I think, to be honest with you, I think the New York Jets probably are one of those teams
That's a
that
good one.
should look for a Spencer Rattler or a Pratt from Tulane type of player
Mm,
rather than the Giants. It feels like at this point, the Giants are going to go into this season with Daniel Jones as their starter if healthy, Drew Lock as a veteran backup that has started games, and Tommy DeVito as their developmental quarterback. And maybe they bring one in as a preferred free agent
mhm.
after the draft to compete with DeVito for the last spot. But to me, I think it would be malpractice if the Giants were to address quarterback this late because it would feel like it's no man's land for what they're trying to do.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. And I think like you had a little bit of that hold your breath kind of territory as you get towards 70 and you're taking players a little bit earlier because you like them. The run on quarterbacks, obviously early in this draft, really made you feel like, okay, is that going to be an impetus for the Giants? Did they miss out on something they thought they were going to accomplish moving back into the first round? But the other part of it is we had highlighted that Spencer Rattler kind of represented like the last prospect that a team might take thinking he could be a starter as opposed to developmental prospects, see how they turn out, but it doesn't look like that, right? There's a reason why Michael Penix Jr. went at 8. Reason why Bo Nix went. There's a reason why JJ McCarthy, like all these guys. There's a reason why they all went in the first round because those are the players that teams believe in to whatever degree can develop into high level starters. After that, big drop off, and because of I think the way that even the first round played out, it still has rolling ramifications. So much offensive talent goes, so then defensive talent starts to fall. So even if you're looking at your board here, Giants or otherwise, I don't think you look at Spencer Rattler and go, "Oh, this is the guy we have to go get." I maybe someone ends up catching a little bit of a diamond in the rough. That'd be great, but it just seems like that was the first round, the first 12 picks. That was the QB discussion for this NFL draft class, and Spencer Rattler's probably closer to what is it, Notre Dame, and quarterbacks of that ilk. There is a Tennessee product that I've talked about before. I think that he, at this point, by the way, not for the Giants, at this point, I think a team would be better off looking at him rather than Spencer Rattler because all the physical tools are there. It's just about whether or not you can coach him up and improve him.
It is interesting that you mentioned. Well, you alluded to Joe Milton as
Yeah.
the player from Tennessee that you love. Obviously, he can throw the ball. I don't know 80 yards if he wants to from standing still, which is incredible. Adam, you know what's interesting, and I'm just
Talk
going
to
to
me.
say this to you, just between you and I. We're all
Okay.
amongst friends here.
Just friends.
This is the after show special.
That's right.
There is whispers that Joe Milton has the athleticism and the potential to play tight end. And a lot of
Have
teams
my mind.
bringing him in thinking,
Saying, hey,
or workshopping whether or not he could be a tight end prospect, just knowing his sheer size and capabilities. I mean, the Giants have a need at tight end. Maybe as
come
a
on.
later round flyer, you bring him in. He
Come
could
on.
also be a guy like, what if they have a gadget play where he like launches the ball 60 yards down the field? He's just an interesting name that you mentioned. If they could develop him as a quarterback, great. Unlikely, but like imagine a tight end that has a rocket arm that you could like all of a sudden create another look for a team. Like, would that be interesting to you?
Of course, 277 on the big board. So I mean, and if he's thinking about a quarterback, you kind of throw out where they're ranked. But if you're thinking about this multiple kind of faceted guy that could be used different ways, if I get running back at 107, and then I get an offensive lineman at 166, right? And I feel like, hey, like we've done a really good job here. I'm gonna mention a couple of linebackers in a second. 183, you know what I mean? I see a quarterback who's played and started at college and like I said, needs some refinement, but has all these traits that maybe could be a little bit of a double dip. Why not? And you've already added some tight ends into your room this offseason, right? They're more inline blocking guys. You want to improve that. It's a weak area. But why not take a chance on a guy? Because guess what? Then there's no real pressure. We want to look at him at kind of multiple positions. Maybe there is a gadget play where he lines up and then all of a sudden you flip it back to him and he bombs one out to any one of the multiple 4-4 sub 40 time wide receivers you have on this roster, right? Like, hey, I could think of worse ways. When you get to 6th, 7th round picks, I think it is where you're supposed to go, hey, guess what? This guy might not be on the roster, but also he could be a player that ends up being an absolute steal for us. I like that. I like the idea. When you hear rumblings about tight end potentially for him, if he's open to it, why wouldn't you do it? And you say, by the way, if you're Milton, you look at it and you go, pretty good spot to go to, right? There's probably certain teams you say, you want to play me a little bit tight end? Okay. But I see that there's an opportunity maybe for me to show you that I could also be your future quarterback. That'd be a really nice spot for him to go.
Yeah, you mentioned like maybe he could compete for the third spot. I mean, we all like Tommy
Right.
DeVito.
Can
We
he
love
be a
the
tight end
story.
and also the third and also a better quarterback than Tommy DeVito? I'm not going to tell you it's impossible.
I mean, Tommy. If you look no further, Tommy DeVito was an undrafted free agent rookie quarterback that came in, weren't sure about what his capabilities were, and won football games as a New
Right.
York Giant. What I find interesting, and we highlighted this on the show, and then
We'll button it up.
we'll probably get out of here. But the three names on NFL Draft Buzz that are top 60 guys.
Yeah.
They're top 60 guys. They're the only three in the top 60 that are still available are Jatavian Sanders, the tight end of Texas, TJ Tampa, the cornerback from Iowa State, and Jalen Wright, the running back from Tennessee. We've mentioned all of them. You're starting to get into like, is it too good to pass up value? I
Right.
mentioned I don't like the skill set of Jatavian Sanders because he's not a willing run blocker, doesn't know how to run block. But if you're sitting there and you're saying, man, if we can teach him how to block, he's an electric player and has top 50 talent, and we're
Yeah,
getting
yeah,
him
yeah.
at 107, is the juice worth the squeeze? For me, I like the safer pick in Theo Johnson, but is this the time where you should be taking swings like that? Maybe the Giants look at it and say, hey, we can teach him how to put his hands up and get into pads of players. We can't teach the raw attributes that someone like Jadavian Sanders has.
And listen, Jadavian Sanders, just to be clear, he's a 6.37 prospect. He projects to be a plus starter. Now, oddly enough, he only has it's a 4.69 40 time, so it's not like he's this blazing athlete out of the tight end spot, but he is certainly a talented pass catcher. You mentioned the production score is great, the athleticism score is good enough. You know, it's interesting. I will say on players like that, I struggle to decide whether or not it's like, can you teach catching focus, right? Bringing the ball into your hands and making sure that you secure the catch. That feels instinctually easier to coach up than maybe technique would be. And ultimately for that, it's like willingness. Because is there enough there from Sanders where you'd say, oh, this guy is just a couple of dial it in focus points away? And then the college, and then also the college game. Who gives a crap? Nobody cares if you're trying to block or not. You're out there to catch passes, right? So I think some of those things really do come into a fold here. But you make a really good point. At a certain level, when you're picking at 107 and there's top 50, top 60 talents on the board available, you do have to kind of go, sorry, we'll figure it out, because all of a sudden we have a much better piece to put onto our roster than we ever thought we could, picking at 6, at 47, 70, and 107. Now all of a sudden that's the equivalent in theory of getting another top 3 round, top 60, top 70 kind of guy that you wouldn't have been able to do without moving forward.
Yeah, and Adam, I couldn't agree more. The interesting thing about, we mentioned TJ Tampa. It's a name that we've talked about. The idea of TJ Tampa, why is he there? He's such an amazing talent. You look at it, and we love using the RAS scores, the relative athletic
Sure.
scores. Kent Lee Platt does a great job on Twitter, putting up visuals and highlights where the relative athletic score is for these players. TJ Tampa did not score very well. He scored a
Does not look like it.
6.31 out of 10. It ranked 894th out of 2,400 cornerbacks that have
Yeah.
been tested. So, he's not necessarily a top tier athlete. And so because of that, it's tougher to teach. When you look at a guy like Andru Phillips, who the Giants picked ahead of him, 8.89 was number 248 out of all of those. So you're talking about, his athletic is significantly higher than someone like TJ Tampa, which is why he's still available. So the question is, do you want a guy at this point that has more upside with his raw athleticism that you can end up molding into a player? Or do you want a guy that had decent production in TJ Tampa, but maybe has these physical limitations that he'll never be able to get to X type of player for you?
Yeah, of course. Of course. Yeah. And it's funny too, like safeties, you look at the RAS score a little bit differently because of expectations and what the role is. That RAS score to me reads like, oh, you would be maybe good as a safety and comes under the box and can do some coverage things. But Tampa was never talked about that way. So it's always fickle how that ends up impacting it. And frankly, again, maybe it's the 40 time, maybe he's a little bit tight in the hips. You combine one or two kind of downside traits and you go, boy, I can just picture this guy on the outside watching burners run past him at the NFL level, and that can be a real problem. So I always find it fascinating, though, as we always say, for two guys that are, we try to read up, we try to watch, we try to look at all these prospects. TJ Tampa was there the entire time leading up to the draft, through the combine, everywhere. He was always right where he was ranked inside of that top group of talent. And now here we are. Here we are going into day 3, and all of a sudden he's there. And it always makes me suspicious about what the NFL and scouting departments and GMs, I think they're always playing games with us. They never want to tell us the full story, and there's always going to be some of those players that do fall. Reminder that the New York Football Giants did have a linebacker in Tyrese Knight, out of UTEP, about 200 on the big board. Certainly a player to watch there as well. Okay, listen, I'm going to tell you the story here. I could talk all day. We could do this for another 5 hours. I don't have kids. Somebody on the show made a bad professional choice in his life, and we have other things that we need to get to over the course of the weekend. But as we said before, a little bit of bonus content. Hope everyone enjoyed it. We'll continue. Throw out things on social. Get over on X. You'll watch us there. If something insane happens, you may see me pop in. Who knows for sure? End of the day, really big weekend for the Giants. Great weekend for NFL, and great weekend for all these young players getting to be a professional, getting to join their NFL teams, and seeing their dreams fulfilled. We'll be back again next time. We will be talking all things New York Football Giants. And doesn't matter. As Andy would want, need, and demand that people know, hey, let's go Big Blue. See you later.
As always, let's go Big Blue.